We're spending 22 minutes with His Eminence, Cardinal Timothy Dolan.
Brigitte, nice to be with you.
It is so wonderful.
Right before Thanksgiving, two Irish people visiting. I couldn't ask for anything more. Good to be with you. Thank you.
I must confess, Your Eminence, I'm only Irish by marriage, but
well, you got great taste.
Nonetheless, I do. And here we are in the season of Lent, and I noticed when you came in, our crack producer Kyle knew that you were a fan of root beer.
Yes,
but you wanted diet. Now, is that a Lenten sacrifice, or is that your beverage of choice?
It's Lenten sacrifice, and I'm taking root beer instead of beer.
Oh, okay. I wasn't going to ask that, but all righty then.
Hey, you see how transparent I am?
Now, we Irish by marriage folks, can we cook corned beef on
yes,
St. Patrick's Day?
all taken care of. You know why, Brigitte? Because March 17th, big day for the Irish anywhere. But in the Archdiocese of New York, he's our patron saint. So we call it the patronal feast day, March 17th, and a dispensationist traditional. Okay. So you eat all you want and put some horseradish
Go
on
ahead and cook it. Okay, great. Let's talk a little bit about the parade.
Sure.
And, you know, I had to read this a couple of times to remind myself that it was only in 2015 when the first LGBT group marched.
Oh, yeah.
And you caught a little flack for that.
No, I caught quite a bit.
And we're okay. All right.
That was a long Lent.
So 2 years have transpired. Do you think that the faithful are more accepting of those marchers in the parade in 2017?
I do. I think a good chunk of them were 2 years ago, in the height of it as well. It was rather controversial, as you hinted at, Brigitte. But I think now it's died down, as controversies usually do. And I think the faithful, and I think the people in general, are fine with anybody marching as long as the dominant theme would be one's Irish identity. So as long as any group, the LGBT included, didn't use it to kind of brag about or publicize whatever they're marching for. As long as it becomes a parade to celebrate Irish culture and heritage, I think people are fine.
That said, do you think Pope Francis's, the famous quote, "Who am I to judge," do you think that made any difference?
I think that's maybe reminded the faithful, since he was only quoting from Jesus. As a matter of fact, it was the gospel earlier this week at our Lenten daily Mass, "Judge not, lest you be judged." I think that reminder of Pope Francis, of the teaching of Jesus, that we have to be very cautious about judging people, has probably had a good effect in the church. Yeah.
Right. Let's talk a little bit about immigration.
Let's do.
And you were out there. You didn't mince words. You called the president's original order impetuous, terribly unfair. You described his issuance of the order as callousness. Since then, he's issued a new order, a revised. Are you happy with it? Are you satisfied?
It's a little better, but I still do worry. See, for us, I think what we as pastors, I'm talking about clergy and pastors, we try not to be politicians. We try to be just that, pastors. And I think we are more concerned about immigrants instead of immigration. The politicians got to be concerned about the fact of it. We're concerned about the people. We put faces and names to those people. So when we see Washington kind of caricaturing groups or resorting to division or anger, we bristle and kind of say, these are real people you're talking about. These are moms and dads and kids and grandparents. So let's always keep a tone of compassion and welcome.
Do you think he might have revised the order because of voices like yours?
Well, I'd like to think so, but I don't think I could take any credit for it. I think the American people in general kind of said, look, Mr. President, we're for you when it comes to border security. We are for you when it comes to scrupulous and rigorous measures to make sure that the wrong kind of people are kept out. We don't want that to violate the rich biblical tradition here in the United States of welcoming the immigrant and the very profound American tradition of always being embracing of the newcomer, of the immigrant. I think as long as you can balance those two, and I think the president heard that from the American people.
Yeah, you had a friend, an Iraqi clergyman, correct? Who
Remember,
didn't want to come because of this order.
Brigitte? He is the Archbishop of Erbil. Now, this is a man right thick in the middle of all the problems that is causing this massive refugee crisis. He's a man who himself, he and his people in Erbil, have welcomed 110,000 refugees from nearby Mosul that is now decimated again. And he's a man that was going to come over to ask for prayers, to explain the dire situation, and yes, to raise some funds and generate some advocacy for his beleaguered people. And I was ready to host him. He was going to have Mass at St. Patrick's. He couldn't come because of the unfair restrictions.
So Iraq is off the list now. He could conceivably come.
Please God, he's going to come.
Will he come?
Will he come on 10:10?
On 22 minutes? We'll be happy to talk
yes.
with him. But is he coming to the United
States? Yes, he can't now till after Easter because we're all kind of busy. But he'll be here, and he's been here before.
He will be coming. Okay, interesting. All right, the inauguration. You were there.
I was there.
And did you catch a little or a lot of flack for that?
No, I caught a lot of flack. But you know, whenever you try to be a bridge, you're going to get run over. That's the purpose of a bridge. So remember 4 years ago when we had President Obama and Mitt Romney, I got blasted more from the conservative side for being with Barack Obama. This time I got more blasted from the liberal side because I had accepted an invitation for the president. What I said is, look, my sacred responsibility is to pray with and for people. When somebody asks me to pray, I do it. That doesn't mean I approve of everything that we do. Everybody needs prayers, especially a man taking the office of presidency. Most people understood. I think most people were happy that I was there. But yeah, I took some flack.
But did you feel that the volume of the flack was louder this time?
No, I didn't detect that. I didn't get as much as I thought. I didn't, and I made it clear. I said, look, if Mrs. Clinton had won, if she was gracious enough to invite me, I would have gone as well. So
now
I teased the president. You know, I prayed for wisdom from the biblical passage, and he said, thank you for that prayer. And I said, now, Mr. President, let's see how long it takes the Lord to answer the prayer for wisdom. So
did you? I was going to ask you about that. Did you give him any personal guidance?
No, all I did is shook his hand and said, my prayers are with you, and that's all. He was good enough to come to see me in the campaign, he and his beautiful wife, and we sat down and visited for an hour or so, as did Mrs. Clinton a couple months before that. So, and I found him to be a very gracious, courteous man in person, very eager to learn, asked some good questions, was kind enough to want to seek my views on things.
So you feel like you got some measure of the man,
I hope
would
so.
you
We
say?
talked about immigration, what you just said. You know, I told him some things we agreed with him on, but I said, you know, we're really worried about some of your rhetoric on immigration. So you got to talk honestly, and I think they appreciate that.
Did you talk with him at all about abortion?
I did. I said, look, Mr. President, let's try to be positive. I'm kind of relieved to hear some of your pro-life sentiments. I am very happy to hear about your solicitude for our schools and for the non-public schools. Thank you for that. I'm a little worried about some of the rhetoric on immigration. So we had a good talk.
Are you hopeful, Your Eminence, that during a Trump administration, be it 4 years, be it 8 years, that we would perhaps see an overturning of Roe v. Wade?
Well, that's the ultimate goal. I think pro-lifers, like myself, are very realistic. To know when we got to that day is going to take a lot of hard work and effort. We're not about to give up. I think what we want to do, Brigitte, is hope for some incremental changes on that, to see that the unborn baby receives the full protection of the law, that the civil rights of the baby in the womb is fully protected. And I think we'll see some incremental change. We already did from the president when he dropped some of those executive orders. And it looks as if now in the new health care reform that's going on, even though there's still a lot of controversy and a lot of unanswered questions about that, it does seem that some of what we found to be the more obnoxious parts of the Affordable Care Act, which we found very helpful in general, but some of the obnoxious parts of it, especially when it would come to religious freedom and when it would come to the rights of the baby in the womb, are going to be eliminated. For that, I'd say hallelujah, except it's Lent, and I can't. So I'll just say
that's another
God.
thing you had to give up.
Yes.
You sat between them famously at the Al Smith dinner.
It was a little chilly, Brigitte.
A little frost in the air that night.
Like the snow on the ground. Yeah.
But then they had that kumbaya moment, no?
They did, and I don't know if you heard me afterwards speak very favorably about when we were waiting at the end. All right, here we are. Mrs. Clinton, Mr. Trump, and myself at the end of the line, and they weren't talking, okay? There were no Valentine's exchange between the two of them. And I'm in the middle, and I finally thought, listen, Dolan, you're supposed to be a man of faith. I said, come here, you two. Let's say a prayer together. So I said a prayer, and they were both very reverent, and I could see them praying along. And then at the end, she went to him and said, whatever happens on Election Day, you and I got to work together. And then he said, and you, ma'am, are one incredibly tough, impressive woman. I thought, wow, this is a good thing.
Okay, cut to now.
Well,
Not
now,
so kumbaya anymore. I don't know.
You know, though.
Do you think they can? Do you think they would? Do you see a time when those two could work together?
I hope so. You know what I hear?
Like
You know what I hear? People that see him one-on-one say he's a very open, accommodating, conciliatory man. So even those that usually publicly don't get along find that at a sit-down they have some common ground. So I'd like to see that day come.
Yeah. If he's not tweeting, I did see you a couple of days ago.
Saw me on, yes.
I did hear you say that.
I would say that about anybody, Brigitte. I'm really worried about, even though I welcome all the technological advances and all, I think there's a built-in peril when it comes to the tweeting and the immediate communication, in that you don't have time to think. And that impetuosity takes over. You know, like we're in a car, if somebody cuts us off, we say things immediately that later we regret.
We do.
We wouldn't say that if we thought about it or if we were in a crowd, and that's what I'm afraid happens when anybody, especially a man in a high honorable position, might tweet. Your darker side sometimes takes over, and things get out there that the prudent side of you later regrets.
Right. And yet he hasn't seemed to curb tweeting at all. I wonder if, you know, there's somebody that he, and I'm not saying one way or another whether I think he should or should not, but did you get a sense of his relationship with his wife? You said you met the two of them, that she might, if his advisors don't, that she might have some influence in him, say, Donald.
Well, I will tell you this, Brigitte, in the short time I had together with them, an hour or so, it was very clear to me that they loved each other, that they had a happy relationship. And that means, I would think, he listens to her. I hope so. We all need to listen to people that we trust, so I would hope so.
To listen to somebody.
Sure.
Let's talk a little bit about Pope Francis.
Oh, let's do. Actually, he just had the 4th anniversary
of
being elected as successor of Peter earlier this week on March 13th. I love him. I'm grateful for him. I'm proud to have been part of the conclave that elected him. So it's been a great 4 years, I think, huh?
Yes. Has he changed the Catholic Church, and will he change the Catholic Church going forward, do you think?
Yes, he has changed the Catholic Church, Brigitte, and I think that's clear to everybody, and I think that's very welcome. Now, keep in mind, when you speak about change in the Catholic Church, he's not changed the essentials, the substance. We as Catholics, like members of other what we call revealed religions, believe that God has told us a certain amount of things, and they come from him, and we don't tamper with them. We faithfully hand them on. You can very much change how that's done, the style that you do that. And Francis has done that, I think, remarkably well. His more informal, approachable, aw shucks, spontaneous attitude, I think that change in what you might call the style or the mode of the papacy, that has allowed him to be more effective in passing on the unchangeable part of church teaching.
Right. So, in other words, the style and the aura might change a little bit, but the rules remain.
The doctrine, what we say is doctrine, which would be revealed, the revealed Word of God, that wouldn't change, and he doesn't want it to. We, most of the time, because it's somewhat novel, when he says something that would indicate a change in long-held church teaching, everybody jumps on it, understandably so. When you look at what he said ahead of time, most of the time he has reaffirmed the immutable teaching of the church. But he said, but let's look at this in a new way. Or let's ask ourselves how we could more effectively present that. Then you see that most of the time he articulates solid church teaching, but then suggests that we might pass that on in a much more colorful, credible way.
Right, and you say we jump on it, and we in the media certainly jump on it.
I think everybody does.
Right.
You know, it's so natural that you would. We just had that when he spoke, when was it, a week or so ago, when he suggested that it's not impossible to think of married priests.
Yes.
Remember that?
Now
I might be anticipating one of your questions. Now, so everybody right away says, "Oh, Pope admits possibility of married priests." Now that in itself isn't new, because that's a discipline of the church which can change. Right. Like the older people among us, not you, Brigitte, but me, would remember the discipline of the church that you never eat meat on Fridays. Now, that didn't come from God.
I remember that.
Remember, that got changed in 1967. That was discipline. Right. Doctrine can't change, discipline can. Priestly celibacy is discipline. It's not essential to the priesthood. It's mighty important, but it's not essential. Right. And the Pope simply said, one can legitimately ask if maybe that might be looked at. But if you look at what he said ahead of time, he defended it. He said it was a good thing. He said that if we ever spoke about a change, if we might speak about a change, it would be in very, very tightly controlled situations. So once again, he was kind of very prudent and conservative in preserving the tradition of the church, but yet open to a possible rethinking of how that might be better lived out and presented.
So all that said, do you think the Catholic Church will one day allow for married priests?
It's possible. I don't think it's probable.
Same for women?
No. Now there's a good question. Thank you very much for bringing that up. In our Catholic wisdom, celibacy, in other words, that priests would not marry, that's discipline of the church. That might change. I don't think it's likely to, but it could. The fact that only men can be ordained priests, that's part of church doctrine, because we understand that that came to us from Jesus himself. That we could not tamper with. You see the difference there. Yes. Doctrine, sure. Discipline. Yeah.
Sure. Let's talk a little bit about the Pope and any effect he might have on the New York Archdiocese and how it conducts business. Sometimes the New York Archdiocese gets the rap as being wealthy.
Doesn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. And we have had headlines lately about some properties being either mortgaged or things being under consideration. Do you think that's sort of a trickle-down effect from Francis, somebody who has really rejected any sort of trappings of wealth or power?
Yes, I think yes, and I think refreshingly, Pope Francis has asked the whole world to consider the relationship with money and property, that if it ever becomes a god, it's wrong. It's going to lead us to hell. Jesus himself said that. The Bible said that. He also says, though, that we do need money and property as long as it's a means to an end and not an end in itself. If it becomes a means to serving the poor, educating poor children, helping the sick, housing the elders, taking care of the homeless, if we use money and property for that, then it's fine. Then we're using it the way the Lord intended it to. What we have to do in the Archdiocese of New York is examine our conscience to make sure that's happening. I believe it is, and thank God I've got some good, respected lay people that help me in that examination of conscience, and they say yes. But we have to be very careful about it, don't we? I'm glad you brought that up. You know, Cardinal, who was my esteemed predecessor, when I got here, he said, "Tim, one of your biggest curses is going to be that people think we're rolling in dough." And he said, "We're not. We're barely getting by." Yeah. We are blessed with property, but most of the property, Brigitte, is being used for what? Education, charity, health care. And it's not the kind of thing that you could easily sell without jeopardizing the valuable ministries that you're performing. So,
right. Back to the Pope, and you mentioned that you were at the conclave.
Yeah.
And I listened to a speech that you gave at Harvard where they were ribbing you because they said, "Oh, and here's Cardinal Dolan, and he almost became Pope, but President Obama said you lost in the swimsuit competition." I thought, are you allowed to talk to him that way? What is that?
Well, I lost it, that's for sure.
You did,
and I'm glad I did.
No, I know that they always the going is always the saying is always there will not be an American Pope.
Well, look, Brigitte, here two things let me say about that. For one, we got one. I mean, in most of the world, when they say the Americas, they mean North and South America. It's true in the more precise way when they say America. They usually mean the United States. But in a way, we can legitimately say we've got an American Pope now, and that we've got a Pope from the Americas. I don't think we'll have a pope from the United States. Why? Because part of the charism of the successor of Peter, the Bishop of Rome, the Pope, is that he's impartial, he's objective, he's the world's greatest moral and spiritual authority. Therefore, he cannot be tied down to any what you might call earthly allegiance. The thinking is, and I admit it may be unfair, but the general thinking is, if you get a pope from a major world power, there's a danger he may be a bit biased towards that power, and that might tinker with his ability to exercise that impartiality and objectivity that he has to. So usually they would shy away from the big, powerful countries, and that means the United States.
The U.S.
Yeah.
Now, I know leading up to the conclave, a lot of people were interviewing you and saying, oh, you know, you're maybe the dark horse candidate, but a candidate nonetheless. Was there a part of you, as a person, who allowed yourself to think, oh, what would it be like?
Well,
and maybe it's me, and maybe it would be nice.
You know, you can't deny that when everybody was talking about you think, my God, what are they talking about? That's not possible, is it? But I mean it when I say, and I'm pretty confident that this would apply to all of my brother cardinals, including Jorge Bergoglio, who became Pope Francis. You kind of don't allow yourself to think about it. And I'm
literally.
I'm serious about that. You would just sort of block it and say, don't go there. By the way, we're not unique in that. Most priests are taught, don't think about the fact that you might get a big plush parish. Don't think about the fact that you may be a bishop. We're not supposed to think that way if we're following Jesus' command to humility and to selfless service. You're human. Now, I knew it, though. See, when, you know, when you walk into the Sistine Chapel, you go through a room that they call the Room of Tears. And you see where the new Pope will dress. Well, he'll change into the white cassock. And they have 3 cassocks. We walk by them, small, medium, and large. And when I saw that there wasn't an XXL, I knew I didn't have a chance. So.
Hence the former president's joke.
Yes.
Last question for you. If you could spend, we got to just spend 22 minutes together.
Sure.
If you could spend 22 minutes with someone,
Brigitte Quinn.
who would it be? That doesn't count. You already did that. Been there, done that.
If I could spend 22 minutes with somebody, I'd fly home and be with my mom, who just had to go into assisted living. So I miss her and I'm worried about her. So I'd go home and see her.
We'll go
Makes sense?
Go see her soon. I just saw mine in assisted living this morning. She's up in...
close by. So.
She's not too far.
Okay.
It's a lot easier for me.
Then you'd agree with that decision.
I absolutely would.
You're on.
I would. Your
Thank you,
Eminence.
Bridget.
Thank you so very much.
A blessed St. Patrick's Day
Thank you.
and Holy Week and Easter.
And enjoy your diet root beer.
You're on. I'll enjoy
No
the
fun.
beer afterwards on Easter.
All right. Very
Thank
good.
you.
Thank you.